Morning. My name is Frank. I'm one of the pastors here at CCV, and I'd like to welcome those of you who are here, especially for the first time. Welcome. We want you to know that you are welcome here. You can call this place home. Let me start with a question. Have you ever gone to another, especially to another country, and perhaps thought you might have offended someone and not known it? Because there are definitely those things that don't translate culturally sometimes, and this happened to me on one trip years ago that I took to the Middle East. We went to, on our first stop, the country of Jordan. And Jordan is the home of an amazing site called Petra. Petra is this place that's like a city carved right into a mountainside, and it is a phenomenal sight to see. And as we're walking around Petra and looking at these ruins in this ancient place, there's this shopkeeper who's like setting up shop outside, and he waves us over to his location, me and the guy I was traveling with. And so we head over to his spot where he's setting up, and as we approach his location, he's backing up and continues to wave us on forward, and he's heading toward this little cave. And we go into this cave, and he's kind of set up a spot there to rest and get out of the sun because it was a hot day. And as we sit down in this space, he tells us to sit down. He then starts to hand us hot coffee. And I'm looking at the coffee, I'm like, it is so hot outside. Just because I'm in the shade doesn't mean that I'm not still hot. I'm not taking this coffee. And so I wave him no, and my buddy Bob is with me. He looks at me, he's like, no, you can't refuse this coffee. And he takes the coffee and looks at me, Frank, you have to accept the drink. And I look at him, dude, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm not drinking coffee right now. And he says, no, you don't understand. He's going to be insulted. He'll be thoroughly offended if you don't accept this coffee. Please, Frank, take the coffee and just drink it. And so I take it, and it's in like a glass. It's a little bit larger than a shot glass, and it was like drinking motor oil. It was just, it was like the coffee ground, half the glass, the shot glass, so half of it was like coffee grounds, and it was so strong. My head was spinning for the next hour. Also, my friend could get a good deal on this guy's stuff. He didn't want to offend him. So that was a good part of the story, is we go out there, and he gives us a good deal on his stuff. But some of those things, culturally, with our behaviors, just don't translate. It's like when you call a cab or an Uber. Where do you sit when the cab pulls up or the Uber pulls up? You sit in the back, right? And let the driver sit up front by themselves. You tell them, you just confirm where you're going, and that's it. You're on your way. Not in New Zealand, not in Australia, not in the Netherlands. They expect you to ride shotgun. So you're supposed to sit in the front seat with the driver, otherwise they're going to be offended. And sometimes it could be a little thing like a gesture when you travel. It's like when I'm with my kids and I'm checking on my boys, I'm like, guys, you okay? And they're like, yeah, Dad, we're good. And they give me the thumbs up, and I give them the thumbs up in return. Like the Fonz, right? Hey! What do they think of the Fonz in Greece? Because you know what that looks like? They're giving them the middle finger. And we use that sign on our staff all the time. What would they think of us with our text message emojis with the thumbs up? That wouldn't translate well, would it? But this is how these things are. They don't always translate. And sometimes it's our humor that doesn't translate culturally. You know, we still have soldiers now, and they've been there for a long time in Korea, at that point between North and South Korea. There's this group of American soldiers who hire a young man to work in their house and to kind of help keep up the place and to take care of things when they're on duty. And so they hire him to maintain the yard, to clean the house, to sweep up the floors. And so as this guy's getting acclimated to these soldiers, this young man, this boy, he's getting to know these soldiers. The soldiers start treating him like they treat each other. They start to tease each other, and they're starting to play pranks on him, and they're tying his shoelaces together, locking him out of the house when he knows he has a job to do. But they quickly find out that it doesn't translate well. And so this kid gets thoroughly offended, and they can tell by his body language and his mannerisms and the way that he's responding to them. So immediately they'd want to resolve it, and they sit the kid down. They're like, look, dude, we are so sorry. We didn't mean to offend you. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. We just want you to know we're really sorry. It won't happen again. And the boy says, it's okay. I won't spit in your soup now. And so sometimes our offenses just don't translate well. But what about when it translates perfectly. And when we're offended for good reason. When that offensive behavior begins to get personal and it really hurts. I have a friend of mine who's married with kids, and he shows up at home one day and finds his wife with another man. And they tried to resolve it. They got together, they went to counseling, they did all the steps to try to make things right, and it looked like things were going to be okay. And they even, with the guidance of this counselor, said, you know what? We need to get a fresh start, a new physical space, even a new place to live for the entire family, me, you, the kids. Let's pick up and move. And so they completely relocate to another state across the country. And just a year later, he shows up at home and the same things happened again. He couldn't stay with her. He couldn't work it out. Another friend of mine had his dad walk out on him and his mom, only to find out later that he was with another woman and started another entire family. Still another friend, she was married and they were trying to have kids for years and it was so difficult. And she finally gets pregnant, and you know what he's doing? He's locking himself in the bedroom watching porn while she's in the kitchen making dinner with her heart broken because she thinks she's not good enough. He wasn't trying to hide it. And she couldn't bear to be with him any longer. When we find ourselves in these kinds of real life circumstances, difficult situations where the offense hurts and it hurts us to the core, sometimes the temptation is to look at one person and want to dump all of the blame on that individual and say, you know what? They're the source of my problem. Brian talked about this over the last couple of weeks. We'll take someone like Jim. Let's go ahead and throw Jim up on the screen. And we look at Jim and his family situation, and we want to put all the blame on them. And sometimes Jim is us. Sometimes we're Jim. Sometimes we're the ones doing the offending. But when we're not, when we're the ones taking on the hurt, we want to take this person and dump all the blame on them. And we're convinced if we can just distance ourselves from Jim, the pain will go away. Things will get better, because they're the source of my problem. And we've been talking about family systems theory and Dr. Murray Brown, where he argued that, you know what, the problem doesn't just begin with one person. And definitely we do. The problems begin in here, and then they don't begin in here and we take them out there. We're not always the source of every single problem, or one individual is not the source of every single problem. See, what we end up doing, what we really do is take problems that exist outside of ourselves, the problems out here, and then we internalize them. In other words, if there's a problem we want to fix, we can't just lay the blame all on one person. We have to understand that there are relationships that people have in their family systems that contribute to the pain that we experience. And you can't understand individuals in isolation from one another. Bowen said the better question is here's Jim and his family dynamics. There's more going on. Go ahead and throw that image up on the screen. There's more than going on than just one person. We have to look at Jim and say, okay, how is Jim's relationship with others? What about his parents and how they interacted with one another, and how did they contribute to that family system and that problem? And how did the grandparents interact with them? And how did the brothers and sisters interact with one another and contribute to the situation that exists today? What about the friends and relationships that Jim maintained? See, the last few weeks we've been working our way through this series on the life of Jacob called Redemption Story. And we all love a good redemption story. Let me ask you, what if your challenges, your pain, your problems were the next redemption story? We've been looking at the life of Jacob and how his relational pain existed in his family and in his situation, and his parents definitely contributed to some of that pain. And so did his grandparents, and now his siblings, as he finds himself in tension with his brother Esau. And Jacob certainly contributed his fair share as he stole his brother's inheritance and blessing, tricking his way into good standing with his dad. Do you remember how Jacob's brother Esau responded to that incident? Let me remind you in Genesis 27. It says Esau held a grudge against Jacob for what he did because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near," meaning, look, I'm going to be mourning the death of my dad very soon. But as soon as that's done, then I will kill my brother Jacob. He's ready to kill his brother for the pain that he feels Jacob has caused himself and his family. So what does Jacob do when he finds out? Well, we learned over the last couple of weeks that Jacob bolts. He runs. He flat out flees, and not just a little ways. He goes far, far away, and to put some real distance between himself and his brother Esau. But if you listened to Brian last week, Jacob discovers something about this distance, that it doesn't make the pain go away. Jacob wants to go back home. He wants to reunite the family. Brian shared that families feel pain even when they're separated. And look, I understand, I get it. There are times when a separation is absolutely necessary. Necessary for your own emotional well-being, so that you can personally be okay. Sometimes it's necessary to separate yourself from that person who you feel is causing you the pain for your own mental, psychological status, so that you can be of sound mind. You need to get some distance between you and them. I get it. Sometimes it's out of a physical need to protect yourself physically from someone else who's been causing you pain. In a very real way, I get it. Sometimes separation is absolutely necessary, but separation does not mean that all of your pain goes away, does it? We all know this. And Jacob figured that out. So Jacob wants to desperately return home. And he wants to make things right. And in doing so, God promises him that everything's going to be okay. He has this encounter with God that changes Jacob to the core, and he realizes he's got to make things right. And so he sets a course for home and meets his brother. And as he sees his brother in the distance, this is what happens in chapter 33. Jacob looks up, and there's Esau, coming with 400 men with him. So how does Jacob respond to this? So he divides up the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two female servants, and he puts the female servants and their children up front, and then Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Can you imagine this scene and what Jacob might be feeling? As he's heading home and he sees his brother in the distance with a small army in front of him. And why is Jacob lining up his family and separating them this way? If you remember last week when Brian was talking about this part of the story, and if you missed it, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the previous weeks, because they will speak to you. Jacob sends word to his brother before he heads back down to go home. He sends some messengers ahead of him to let his brother know he's coming and to tell him, hey, I want to get back together. I want to see you again. I want to meet you. And do you remember how the messengers came back? What kind of message the messengers returned with? Look at chapter 32, verse 6. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, oh, we went to meet your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you, but he's not coming by himself. He's coming with 400 men with him. And so what is Jacob's reaction? It's a reaction of fear. Jacob's responding in fear. He then, we're told in the text, he not just separates his family like we just read, putting the kids up, the servants up front, and then another part of the family, and then Joseph and Rachel. No, it's not just separating, he's separating everything he owns if you read the whole text. All of his livestock, the cows, the goats, the sheep, they're all separated into multiple groups. Everything Jacob owns, because he's moving everything home with him, is separated into multiple groups to prepare for his brother's attack, hearing about these 400 men. He's responding in fear. He knows that his brother is holding a grudge against him. And this army proves it. And now on his journey home, he says, I'm going anyway. Why does Jacob do that? Because God has promised him that he's going to work in this situation, that something new is going to happen. And so Jacob returns home anyway. And this is the first thing we can learn about Jacob's behavior in this. And if you're taking notes, you want to write this down. The first thing we can learn is this. Don't let your fear steal your redemption story. Don't let your fear steal it. Jacob knows God is with him. And he's not going to let his fear steal this redemption story that God has promised. In order to not let this happen, Jacob has to release the grip that the grudge has on his life. The grudge that he may hold against his brother for threatening his life. The grudge that his brother is holding against him for stealing his birthright and his inheritance and this blessing. He's got to release that, and the first step toward that is going home knowing that God is with him. And maybe that's why you needed to be here today, to hear just that. To hear that God is with you, just like he was with Jacob. Right in the middle of your pain and your fears, God is with you, and you don't have to let fear steal your redemption story. You can move forward knowing that God has a promise for you as well. Let's go back to this text and see what Jacob does next. Verse 3. It says, he himself went on ahead. And what does Jacob do? He moves ahead of the family, ahead of all his belongings. And what does he do? He bows down to the ground 7 times as he approaches his brother. This is the second principle we can learn from Jacob today. It's this. Own your problem with humility and respect. Genesis tells us first that Jacob is stepping forward on ahead of everyone else on his own. That is Jacob saying, bro, Esau, I'm owning this problem. I'm stepping forward. You don't have to meet me. I'm stepping forward anyway. I'm stepping forward ahead of my family, ahead of my servants, ahead of everything I own. It's just me out here in front of you in this army, and I'm owning the problem. Again, Brian talked about this last week if you were listening. At some point, a disciple of Jesus has to do what? Has to say, you know what? Even all of the circumstances and pain that's in this situation right now, even all of it may have not come from me. I'm going to step out and I'm going to own it anyway because it's going to change starting with me. And that's what Jacob's doing. He's saying, look, bro, Esau, this is going to change, and it's going to change starting with me. And I'm stepping out from everything on my own out here. You don't have to meet me, but I'm stepping out anyway. And then what does he do? He takes a couple of steps forward, and then he bows down before his brother. And then he takes a couple more steps forward, and he bows down again before his brother. And he repeats this action 7 times. This is not just being humble. Scholars tell us that this behavior, this bowing down 7 times, in ancient Near Eastern culture, this was complete and total submission to his brother. Subordination, saying, look, bro, I am now yours to do with what you wish because I have wronged you so greatly. And I want you to notice something. These are things that Jacob is doing. Have you noticed that Jacob hasn't said a word yet? He's taking these steps forward, and his behavior is speaking first. And sometimes when we're in these kind of situations, we want to be heard, even if we're the one apologizing. Look, I need you to hear me. I need you to hear me and say, I am so sorry. And they don't want to hear it, do they, sometimes? Maybe the better thing for us to do is to follow Jacob's example and take a step forward with humility and respect and do so without saying a word first. And trust me, that will speak more than your words could ever have spoken. Thomas Merton once said, he said, pride, you know what pride does? It makes us artificial. But humility makes us real. And with these actions, without words, Esau knew that Jacob was very real in this moment. And maybe that's an action step that you can take in your situation. Let's read the rest of the story. Continuing with verse 4, it says, but Esau, how does Esau respond as he sees his brother be real? Look at how Esau responds. He runs to meet Jacob and embraced him, throws his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And Esau looks up and he sees the women and children. He says, who are these with you? Jacob answers, they're the children that God has graciously given your servant. Now Jacob speaks, and still in his first words, see how he refers to himself? As a servant. Now words of humility follow. And then the female servants and their children approach and bow down. And next Leah and her children came and bowed down. And last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds now I see that I've met? He says, to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. But Esau says, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And Jacob responds, no, please, said Jacob. I have found favor in your eyes. Accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you've received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. So Jacob must have been so relieved as all this went down, to get acceptance from his brother after so many years. But did you pick up on that whole gift exchange moment? Where Esau sees all these flocks and herds, and Jacob saying, look, this is a gift for you. Scholars tell us that this was a big part of culture back then, the gift giving and receiving. And this doesn't always translate well for us in modern times, what this really means. And this was a special moment for Jacob and Esau. You see, when Jacob first offers this gift to his brother, the word gift that he uses is a Hebrew word that means to like pay tribute, like he's paying a tax, or like he's paying interest on a loan because he owes his brother something. He feels like he's indebted to his brother in a financial way. And so he's like, look, man, let me pay this tax. I owe you this. Let me pay this interest on the loan that I had from you. And when he says it that way, Esau's like, no, I've got plenty, man. I'm good. And it looks like you've done well for yourself. I've done well for myself. We're fine, bro. And then Jacob says it differently. He says, no. Esau, this is a gift, this present that I'm giving you. It's something more than a present. He uses this Hebrew word, beracha. And it doesn't mean just a mere gift. He says, no, Esau, I'm giving you the blessing that I owe you. And that word, blessing, spoke to the core of Esau's problem. Because remember, what was it that Jacob stole from his brother? Blessing. And in that moment, Esau knew that this apology was so real. Real with his actions and now real with his words. And what does Esau do? He accepted it. It was at that moment where he spoke to the core issue that Esau accepted this gift and apology. And scholars tell us that the acceptance of a gift in this culture is the offering of another one in forgiveness. He'd made it right. And as brothers, they were going to be okay. And that leads us to our third principle we can learn from this situation, is that forgiveness offers us something. Forgiveness offers freedom. Freedom for Jacob as he can now reunite his family home with the other family members and his brother Esau. Forgiveness offers freedom for Esau because Esau is releasing the grip that this grudge has had on his life for so many years. Let me wrap up with this quote from Lewis Smedes, great Christian author. He says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that all along the prisoner was you. And maybe you're here today and you're Jacob. You're the offender. You've caused a great deal of pain in your family and your relationships. Maybe what you needed to hear today is that God is with you. And you're not alone in your pain, and you don't have to let fear steal your redemption story. You can move forward knowing God is with you, and you can make it right. Maybe you're here today and you're Esau, and you've been hurt deeply. Maybe you need to release the grip that this grudge has had on your life. This grudge that's been holding you prisoner to your past. Or maybe you're here today and you just needed to start by hearing that God is with you. Right in the middle of your fear and pain, He's not going to leave you alone, and He's going to give you the courage necessary to move forward so that you can start your redemption story. Let's pray. God, I'm so grateful for the wisdom contained in this series of events of Jacob's life that we've been learning from. And God, as all of us gather here together as followers of you and your Son, I ask that you give us wisdom on how to proceed in our own situations, our own challenges, our own fears, our own pains, the things that we feel have been done wrong to us. God, give us wisdom moving forward on when to create that distance and, God, when to bridge the gap. We ask for this in Jesus' name. Amen.